A lonely rancher in Texas, who has lived in isolation for years after losing his family, sees his life completely transformed when a group of 10 Apaches arrive on his land asking for shelter. What begins as a tense and distrustful encounter evolves into a journey of mutual healing, where both sides discover that their past wounds can be mended through compassion and understanding. It's a story about overcoming prejudice, loss, and how humanity can flourish in the most unexpected places. The sound of hooves on gravel made me freeze halfway through chopping firewood. In 23 years of living alone on this ranch, unexpected visitors meant only one thing: trouble. I set down the axe and reached for the rifle, leaning against the porch post, my weathered hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, mind you, but from the arthritis that had been eating at my joints for the past decade. Through the dust cloud kicked up by their horses, I counted them. 10 figures on horseback, moving in formation like they owned the land they rode on. As they got closer, my heart started hammering against my ribs. These weren't cattle rustlers or drifters looking for work. These were Apache. "Easy now, Samuel," I whispered to myself, using my full name like my late wife Martha used to when I got worked up. "Easy now." The lead rider, a man who looked to be in his 50s with gray streaking through his long black hair, raised his hand in what I hoped was a peaceful gesture. They stopped about 50 yards from my porch, close enough for me to see the exhaustion etched into their faces, but far enough that I didn't feel completely cornered. My mind raced back to the stories my grandfather used to tell about the Apache Wars, about raids and battles that had painted this very land red with blood. But these people didn't look like warriors ready for battle. They looked like refugees. "We come in peace," the leader called out, his English clear but heavily accented. "We seek shelter." I kept the rifle in my hands, but didn't raise it. "This is private land," I called back, my voice cracking slightly from disuse. I'd barely spoken to another human being in months. "We know," he replied. "We have nowhere else to go." There were women among them, I realized, and what looked like a couple of young ones too. Their horses were thin, ribs showing through patchy coats. These people had been traveling hard and long. "Why here?" I asked, stepping closer to the edge of my porch. "Why my place?" The leader dismounted slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "Because you are alone, like we are now. Because this land," he gestured around him, "this land remembers our ancestors. And because we heard you are a man who keeps to himself." That last part hit me like a punch to the gut. Word traveled fast in small communities, even when you tried your best to avoid them. Everyone in the county knew about Sam Fletcher, the hermit rancher who'd lost his wife and 2 boys in a car accident 8 years ago and hadn't been the same since. "I can't help you," I said, though even as the words left my mouth they felt wrong. "I've got nothing to offer." The Apache leader studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to see right through the walls I'd built around myself. "We do not ask for much, just a place to rest. We can work." "Work?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Friend, I can barely keep this place running myself. Half my cattle are scattered across 3 counties. My fences are falling down, and I haven't fixed a decent meal in—" I stopped myself. Why was I telling this stranger my business? But he nodded like he understood. "We have watched your ranch," he said quietly. "We know you struggle alone." A chill ran down my spine. "You've been watching me." "Not watching to harm," he said quickly. "Watching because we have been living in the hills above your land for 2 weeks. We see you work from dawn to dusk. We see you sit on your porch at night staring at nothing." The truth of his words cut deep. That was exactly what I'd been doing, sitting on this porch every night, staring out at the darkness and remembering better times. Times when Martha would bring me coffee and the boys would be doing their homework at the kitchen table, their voices carrying through the open windows. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "A chance," he said, "nothing more." I looked at the group again, really looked this time. There was a woman holding a small child, maybe 3 or 4 years old, an elderly man who was swaying slightly in his saddle from exhaustion, young men who reminded me of my own boys at that age, full of potential but worn down by circumstances beyond their control. "The government's looking for you, isn't it?" I asked. The leader's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "The reservation, it is not a good place for us anymore. Too much drinking, too much dying. We chose to leave. And go where? Wherever the land will have us." I understood that feeling more than I cared to admit. After the accident, I'd thought about leaving too, about selling this place and disappearing somewhere nobody knew my story. But in the end, I couldn't bring myself to abandon the last place where my family had been happy. "I've got one spare room in the house," I heard myself saying, surprised by my own words. "And there's an old bunkhouse that might still be habitable, but I'm warning you, I'm not much for company these days." The relief that washed over the leader's face was unmistakable. "We are grateful. Don't be grateful yet," I said, finally setting down the rifle. "You haven't seen what you're getting yourself into." As they began to dismount, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a flutter of nervousness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the possibility that my carefully constructed solitude was about to be shattered forever. If this moment is stirring something inside you, tell me from which part of the world you're listening to this story. The first night was awkward as hell. I'd given the women and children the spare room in the house, while the men settled into the old bunkhouse. The leader, who'd introduced himself as Joseph Running Bear, insisted on sleeping outside under the stars, despite my protests about the cold October nights. I lay awake in my own bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people in my house. The soft murmur of voices speaking in Apache, the creak of floorboards as someone got up for water, the gentle humming of a lullaby that reminded me painfully of Martha singing to our boys. By dawn, I was already on the porch with my coffee, watching the sun paint the distant hills orange and pink. Joseph emerged from his bedroll like he'd been awake for hours, which he probably had been. In my experience, people running from something never slept easy. "Mr. Fletcher," he said, approaching the porch with careful steps. "Sam," I corrected. "Just Sam." He nodded. "Sam. My people are grateful for your kindness. We would like to begin working today if you will allow it." I studied his weathered face over the rim of my coffee cup. "You ever worked cattle before?" "Some of us have. And what we don't know, we can learn." It had been 3 years since I'd had help with the ranch work. Used to be I'd hire seasonal hands for roundups and fence repairs, but after Martha died, I'd let most of that go. Pride, maybe, or just the simple fact that talking to people about normal things felt impossible when your whole world had ended. "All right," I said finally, "but we do this my way." Within an hour, I realized I'd underestimated these people completely. The younger men took to ranch work like they'd been born to it, moving cattle with an intuition that took most cowboys years to develop. The women organized themselves without any direction from me, cleaning the bunkhouse, tending to the horses, and somehow managing to cook a breakfast that actually tasted like food instead of the canned beans and stale bread I'd been living on. But it was the children that really got to me. The little girl I'd seen the day before, Sarah, her grandmother called her, reminded me so much of my youngest, Tommy, that I had to turn away when she laughed. She couldn't have been more than 4, but she followed the older kids around with the same determined expression Tommy used to wear when he was trying to keep up with his big brother. "She lost her parents 6 months ago," Joseph said quietly, appearing beside me as I watched her play with some smooth stones she'd found near the water trough. My chest tightened. "How?" "Sickness, the kind that comes from despair." He was quiet for a moment. "Her grandmother, Anna, is all she has left. That's why we had to leave the reservation. Anna couldn't bear to watch another generation fade away in that place. I understood that too. After the accident, I'd seen that same despair in my own reflection every morning. The difference was, I'd had the luxury of hiding from the world. These people were fighting to save what was left of theirs. "The government won't stop looking for you," I said. It wasn't a question. Joseph's jaw tightened. "No, they will come eventually. And when they do, we will face that when it happens." He turned to look at me directly. "Why are you helping us, Sam?" "Really?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been asking myself the same thing since yesterday, and I still didn't have a good answer. Maybe because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go. "But you have this place. You have land, a home." I shook my head. "A place isn't a home when you're the only one living in it." Something passed between us in that moment, an understanding that didn't need words. We were both men carrying losses too heavy to bear alone, though we'd been trying to do exactly that. The work continued through the morning. I found myself actually talking to people, giving directions, even laughing once when one of the younger men tried to rope a particularly stubborn heifer and ended up flat on his back in the dirt. It felt strange, like using muscles that had been asleep for years. Around noon, Anna brought me a plate of something that smelled better than anything I'd eaten since Martha died. The elderly Apache woman moved slowly but with dignity, her gray hair braided with small beads that caught the sunlight. "You have a kind heart," she said in careful English as she handed me the plate. I nearly choked on my first bite. "Ma'am, I haven't been accused of that in a long time." She smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "Hearts can sleep for a long time. but they do not forget how to wake up. That afternoon, while the men continued working on the fence line, I found myself sitting on the porch with little Sarah. She'd discovered my old golden retriever, Buck, who'd been hiding in the barn since yesterday, probably overwhelmed by all the new people. Now she was petting him with the gentle concentration only small children possess. "He's lonely," she said in perfect English, looking up at me with dark eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "Yeah, he is," I agreed, my throat tight. "Were you lonely too?" The question hit me like a physical blow, out of the mouths of babes, as Martha used to say. "Yes, sweetheart, I was. Are you still?" I looked around at the bustling activity in my formerly silent yard, at people who'd brought life back to a place that had been more like a tomb than a home. Not so much today. If you've ever felt that kind of loneliness, or that moment when it finally starts to lift, leave me a comment telling me which country you're listening from. 3 weeks passed faster than I'd expected. The Apache families had settled into a routine that somehow included me without making me feel crowded. Mornings started with coffee shared on the porch with Joseph, days filled with more productive work than I'd accomplished in years, and evenings around a fire where stories were told in 2 languages. I was beginning to think we might actually make this arrangement work when Sheriff Martinez's patrol car came rumbling up my drive on a Tuesday morning in early November. My blood ran cold. Sheriff Martinez and I went way back. He'd been one of the first responders the night of the accident, the one who'd had to tell me that Martha and the boys hadn't made it to the hospital. He was a good man, but he was also a lawman, and I knew exactly why he was here. "Morning, Sam," he said, stepping out of his cruiser with the careful movements of someone trying not to appear threatening. "How you been?" "Can't complain," I replied, though my heart was hammering. "What brings you out this way, Jorge?" He glanced around the ranch, and I knew he was taking note of everything, the repaired fences, the organized corrals, the general air of a place being properly maintained for the first time in years. "Had some reports of unusual activity out here. Thought I'd check in." "What kind of reports?" Jorge pulled off his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. "Sam, you know I respect your privacy, but I got calls from 3 different people saying they've seen Apache moving around your property. Now, there's been some concerns about a group that left the reservation without authorization." I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was screaming. "People see all kinds of things out here, deer, elk, shadows." "Sam," his voice carried a warning, "don't make this harder than it has to be." Before I could respond, Joseph appeared around the corner of the barn, moving with the quiet confidence I'd come to recognize. He'd probably been listening to every word. "Sheriff," he said simply, nodding respectfully. Jorge's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon, though he didn't draw it. "Mr. Running Bear, Joseph Running Bear. Mr. Running Bear, I'm going to need to see some identification, and I'll need you to come with me to answer some questions." "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I'd intended. Both men looked at me in surprise. "Jorge, these people are my guests. They're not causing any trouble." "Sam, they're fugitives. They left the reservation without proper documentation. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has issued—" "The Bureau can kiss my ass," I interrupted, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "This is my land, and these people are under my protection." Jorge stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Sam, what the hell has gotten into you? You haven't spoken to another human being in months, and now you're harboring what? Families? Children? People who've done nothing but work hard and treat me with more kindness than I've seen in years." The sound of footsteps made us all turn. Anna was approaching with little Sarah at her side, the child's small hand firmly clasped in her grandmother's weathered one. Behind them came the others, men, women, children, all moving to stand with Joseph in a silent show of solidarity. "Sheriff Martinez," Anna said, her English formal but clear. "I am Anna Crowfeather. These are my people." Jorge looked uncomfortable, caught between duty and the obvious reality that these weren't dangerous criminals. "Ma'am, I understand your situation, but the law requires—" "The law," Anna interrupted quietly, "has not been kind to my people." Little Sarah stepped forward, and my heart nearly stopped. She walked right up to Jorge, tilted her head back to look at him, and said, "Are you here to take us away from Uncle Sam?" Uncle Sam. When had that happened? When had this little girl who'd lost everything decided that I was family? Jorge knelt down to Sarah's level, his expression softening. "Sweetheart, it's not that simple." "It is to her," I said, finding my voice again. "Jorge, look around. Look at these people. Look at what they've helped me build here. They're not hurting anyone." "Sam," I have to follow the law. The reservation is where they belong. The reservation is where their spirits go to die, Joseph said quietly. We have seen too many of our young people lost to despair there. We chose a different path, and I chose to help them walk it, I added. Jorge, these people have given me my life back. For the first time since Martha and the boys died, I have a reason to get up in the morning. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, looking from me to the Apache families and back again. Sam, even if I wanted to look the other way, this is bigger than just me. The feds are involved now. They know this group is in the area. My stomach dropped. How long do we have? Maybe a few days, maybe less. Jorge put his hat back on. Sam, I'm going to pretend I didn't see anything here today. But you need to understand, when the federal agents come, I won't be able to protect you or them. After Jorge left, the mood around the ranch was somber. The adults spoke in hushed tones, while the children seemed to sense the tension without understanding it. I found myself on the porch again that evening, but this time I wasn't alone. Joseph sat beside me, both of us staring out at the stars. We will leave tomorrow, he said quietly. We will not bring trouble to you. Like hell you will, I replied. We're going to figure this out. Sam, you have already done more than... Joseph, 3 weeks ago I was half dead inside, just waiting for my body to catch up. These people, your people, they brought me back to life. You think I'm going to just let the government tear that away? For the first time since I'd known him, Joseph Running Bear smiled. Then what do you suggest? I was quiet for a moment, a crazy idea forming in my mind. I suggest we remind them that this is still America, and every person deserves a chance at freedom. Where are you watching this story from? I'd love to know which city you're joining me from as we face this moment together. 2 days later, they came at dawn. 4 black SUVs rolled up my drive like they owned the place, kicking up dust that settled over everything like a bad omen. I was ready for them, standing on my porch with my coffee and my grandfather's old Winchester, not pointed at anyone but visible enough to make a statement. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s, all business in a crisp suit that had no place on a working ranch. She stepped out of the lead vehicle and surveyed my property with the cold efficiency of someone used to getting her way. Mr. Fletcher, I'm Agent Rebecca Morrison, Bureau of Indian Affairs. We have reason to believe you're harboring individuals who've unlawfully left their designated reservation. Good morning to you too, Agent Morrison, I replied, taking a deliberate sip of my coffee. Lovely weather we're having. Her jaw tightened. Mr. Fletcher, this isn't a social call. We have legal authority to search these premises and remove any unauthorized individuals. You got a warrant? She held up a folded paper. Right here. Behind me, I heard the soft sound of the screen door opening. Joseph stepped onto the porch, followed by Anna, and then, one by one, all 10 members of their group. They arranged themselves behind me in a line that spoke of quiet dignity and unshakable resolve. Well then, I said, setting down my coffee cup. I guess you better get to it. Agent Morrison's expression hardened as she took in the scene. Mr. Running Bear, I presume? She addressed Joseph. You and your group need to come with us immediately. No, Joseph said simply. I beg your pardon? I said no. Joseph stepped forward, his voice calm but unwavering. We are not going back. Mr. Running Bear, you don't have a choice in this matter. You've violated federal law by leaving the reservation without proper authorization. What law? I interrupted. The law that says American citizens can't travel freely in their own country? The law that says people can't seek a better life for their children? Agent Morrison turned her cold gaze on me. Mr. Fletcher, these individuals are wards of the federal government. They belong on the reservation where proper services can be provided for them. Services? Anna spoke for the first time, her voice carrying decades of pain and wisdom. You mean the services that buried my son in despair? The services that taught my granddaughter to expect nothing from life but government handouts and broken promises? Little Sarah, who had been holding her grandmother's hand, suddenly broke free and ran to me. She wrapped her small arms around my legs and looked up at Agent Morrison with the fearless defiance that only children possess. Uncle Sam is taking care of us now, she declared. We don't want to go back to the sad place. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I saw something flicker across Agent Morrison's face, a crack in her professional armor, but she quickly regained her composure. Mr. Fletcher, if you interfere with this operation, you'll be charged with obstruction of justice and harboring fugitives. Then I guess you better bring more handcuffs, I said, reaching down to place my hand on Sarah's shoulder, because I'm not letting you take these people anywhere they don't want to go. That's when I heard it, the sound of vehicles approaching from the east. My heart sank. thinking it was reinforcements. But then I recognized the familiar rumble of Sheriff Martinez's patrol car, followed by several pickup trucks. Jorge stepped out of his cruiser, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came Father Miguel from the Catholic Church in town, Dr. Sarah Chen from the county hospital, and at least a dozen other people I recognized from the community. Ranchers, shopkeepers, teachers, people who'd known me and my family for years. "Morning, Agent Morrison," Jorge said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Heard you might be having some difficulty out here." Agent Morrison looked confused and increasingly uncomfortable. "Sheriff Martinez, this is a federal matter. Your presence isn't required." "Well, now that's where you might be wrong," Jorge replied. "You see, I've been doing some research since our last conversation. Turns out there's no actual law requiring these folks to stay on the reservation. The BIA has policies, sure, but policies aren't laws." Father Miguel stepped forward, his collar gleaming in the morning sun. "Agent Morrison, I've come to offer these families sanctuary at our church, if they choose to accept it. And I'm here to provide medical care," Dr. Chen added, "free of charge, for as long as they need it." One by one, the other community members spoke up, offering jobs, housing, support, a whole network of people willing to stand between the Apache families and a system that had failed them. Agent Morrison looked around at the growing crowd, her authority suddenly seeming far less absolute. "This is highly irregular. These people have responsibilities to their tribal government. Their responsibility," I interrupted, "is to their children and their future, and they've found both of those things here." Joseph stepped forward again, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "Agent Morrison, my people have been pushed from place to place for over a century, always in the name of what was best for us, what was legal, what was proper. But we have found something here that we haven't had in years. Hope, dignity, a chance for our children to grow up believing they can become anything they choose to be." He gestured towards Sarah, who was still clinging to my legs. "That little girl has learned to laugh again. Her grandmother sleeps through the night for the first time in months. Our young men have work that makes them proud. Are you going to take that away in the name of bureaucracy?" The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Finally, Agent Morrison folded up her warrant and tucked it back into her jacket. "This isn't over," she said, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. "Maybe not," I replied, "but today it is." As the federal vehicles disappeared down my drive, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 long years, the warmth of community, of belonging to something bigger than my own grief. The Apache families had given me back my life, and now an entire town had stood up to protect theirs. If you've ever lived through something like this, or witnessed the power of people standing together, leave me a comment telling me which country you're listening from. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with the simple courage to do what's right.